Hey, it's Paul Zweben from the Zweben team of Douglas Elliman, and I wanted to talk to you about how I got into the back of this cab with Rob Hayes of 7 Train Media. It all started when I was a little boy growing up in New Jersey, and I took a home economics class, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I love to cook, and I think I'm going to be a chef. So I remember walking up to my grandmother, Sarah, who was 4'10", and I said to her, Grandma, I want to be a chef. And, being a little Jewish boy growing up in New Jersey, she looked at me, and I could tell she was not happy. And she basically said, you're going to be a chef. She goes, you should be a doctor or a lawyer. And she told me to get out. And that created a fire in my stomach, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to show her. I am going to show her that I am going to be the best chef ever. So at that point, I got an apprenticeship position in a bakery called the Brookdale Pastry Shop in Bloomfield, New Jersey, and in Verona, New Jersey. And I worked there for 3 years. I started work at 6 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday, and then on the weekends I worked even longer hours, but I worked from 6 a.m. until 11 a.m. and then went directly to school. So I smelled like a donut every single day when I went to school. So I worked at a bakery in the mornings, I went to school for 3 hours a day, and then I went to a restaurant at night, and I worked on the line in a restaurant called the Sandalwood Restaurant in Clifton, New Jersey. I started out there running the salad bar. And I'll tell you how long ago that was. That was in 1979. There was no such thing as kale salads in a salad bowl now. Use kale to decorate the salad bar as a garnish. No one ate kale. So once that was done, I applied to the Culinary Institute of America up in Hyde Park, and I went there. And prior to going there, my parents sat me down and said, we want you to go to college, we want you to get an education, but we can't afford it, so you need to figure it out. So I bought a book on scholarships, and I sent letters to the Heinz Foundation, yes, the Ketchup Foundation, and they sent me a check for a couple $1,000s. And I did that to a bunch of different companies, and they helped me go to school. And then the rest, I just figured out how to pay for it, working weekend jobs and stuff. So went to the Culinary Institute, started there in 1982, graduated in 1984, and halfway through school, my parents sat me down again and said, you need to get a 4-year degree. You can't just get a 2-year degree at the Culinary Institute and go cook, because it's not going to make you a perfectly well-rounded business person. And I was pissed again, because all I wanted to do was cook. And they said, you have to go to school for hospitality. You have to get a 4-year degree. So halfway through the Culinary Institute, you do an internship. I got a job at the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach, which obviously everyone knows is a absolute classic hotel and resort. And I figured out a way to set up residency in Florida. And then I got accepted into Florida International University after the Culinary Institute. And boom, because of my residency, I got to go to school for a very, very low, well, just a much lower price. And it's really a price that I could only afford. So I worked at the Grand Bay Hotel when I went to Florida International University. I worked there 40 hours a week. I was taking 21 credits a semester. I was miserable, but I was learning. I was learning about business. I was learning about, looking at food differently. And then I graduated in 1986, and it was time to come to New York and cook. So I had no connections whatsoever. And there was one person that somebody had told me, a professor had told me to talk to this guy named Mark Sarazin, who ran a butcher, a huge meat purveyor called DeBragger and Spittler. We're going to go back to that in a second. So I met a headhunter, and he said to me, you should work at this New York City hotel, but it's in New Jersey. And I actually bit. And I was hired as an executive sous chef, which was a lot. And I think I was making like $25,000 a year, which was a lot of money for me. And I was working there. I think I worked there for about a year and a half, and then it was time to come to New York. So I I decided to call this gentleman, Mark Sarrazin, again, who owned this company called DeBragger and Spittler, which was a high-end meat company in New York. And, you know, Mark he was the man. He was the French mafia. And not in a bad way, but you went to meet Mark and he placed you in very, very good kitchens. So I remember having an appointment with Mark and the dad, and I was in, you know, my Sears suit that probably didn't fit me properly, and I had my portfolio that was about this thick with a picture of me in a chef outfit and a resume and all my letters of recommendation. And I walked into this big meat purveyor down in the meatpacking district, and somebody walked me up to Mark's office, and I walked into the office, and it was this old school, like, oak panels, and on the desk were these 3 giant Rolodexes. Mark knew everyone. Mark was about 6'2", 6'4", I don't know, 260 pounds, I would say. And I walked into his office and he shook my hand and he's like, welcome. And he goes, let me take a look at your portfolio. And I showed him my portfolio, and he says to me, so what chefs have you worked with? I said, well, I worked with this Sandalwood restaurant in New Jersey, and I worked for this baker in Verona, New Jersey, in Bloomfield, New Jersey, and I worked at the Breakers Hotel. And he stopped me, he goes, Paul, I asked you a specific question. What chefs have you worked for? And I said, well, I worked for the chef at the Breakers Hotel. And he's like, stop. You haven't worked for anyone. So within about 2.5 minutes, he basically took the 8 years of experience and that I had and accumulated and went to school, and he flushed it down the toilet. And he was like, here's the deal. I am going to give you the name of the chef of the River Cafe. Paul, do you even know where the River Cafe is? And I was just like, no. So Mark wrote down on one of his business cards, he wrote David Burke, he wrote the phone number for the River Cafe, and he goes, figure out how to get there, but he gave me directions. And I remember leaving his office, and I was so incredibly deflated. And I will tell you, that was the turning point in my culinary career. Unfortunately, Mark passed away a while ago, and he left such an incredible impact on my life and my career. But I'm grateful for meeting Mark and his whole family. They're just incredible people. So drive to the River Cafe. I figure out how to get there. I go over the Brooklyn Bridge, and I'm like sweating. I'm so upset. He's like, Mark is like, he's gonna give you a cook position. I'm like, I was an executive sous chef in Morristown, New Jersey. So I walk into into the back kitchen of the River Cafe, and the food steward looks at me and goes, can I help you? And I said, yes. I said, I'm here to see David Burke. Hopefully I'm going to interview with him and hopefully get a job. And he was like, okay, just give it a second. And I remember looking into that kitchen, and man, it was filled with such testosterone and so many guys and gals in there just working their tails off. And I was just like, wow, I think I have found home. And David came out and he talked to me, and he's like, look, he goes, I need cooks, and I'm willing to offer you $8.75 an hour. Do you want the job? And I was like, yeah, I do want the job. And that was the beginning, man. I have, working at the River Cafe with David Burke in 1988 to 1991 was like going to Wharton Business School for cooking. Every guy and gal that worked there next to me, they all tested us. They all pushed each other. We were this cohesive, competitive group of guys and gals that just wanted to get better. David Amarelli, Kevin Hager, David Burke, Rick Lockinen, Sammy DeMarco, all of these guys, Pedro, all of these guys had left such an impact on my life. I'm still friends with all of them. And that's where it all happened. And that was the beginning. So in 1991, after being one of David Burke's Top Gun's sous chefs, I realized it was time for me to become a chef myself. And I remember walking under the Brooklyn Bridge with David, I had already accepted a position as an executive chef in a small restaurant. And I looked at him, I said, it's time. And he looked at me and he goes, I know. And it was like David was the mother hen pushing me out of the nest and giving me his blessing. And that was another big turning point in my career. So I went and worked at a restaurant called Chelsea Central, which is where Red Cat was on 10th Avenue and 23rd Street. Unfortunately, Red Cat closed at the end of December of last year, but I did sell Jimmy Bradley's apartment last year as well. Hey Chef, who owned the Red Cat. So I worked there for about 2 years. I got 2 stars from Brian Miller from the New York Times. In my mind, Brian Miller was without a doubt the best food writer ever in the New York Times, if not anywhere. The guy was amazing. He made you could close your eyes after reading a review of his and you would feel like you were in the restaurant. So got 2 stars from them. And then it was time to start a restaurant business for my own. So I muscled my way into a restaurant partnership. They were not happy about it. And we subsequently opened a lot of restaurants. Main Street, Calle Ocho, Rain East, Rain West, Django, Union Pacific with Rocco DeSpirito, who's now the chef down at the Standard, and he's crushing it right now. BLT Prime on 22nd Street, which unfortunately closed last December, and BLT Steak in Washington, D.C. So I worked at BLT Steak in Washington, D.C. for about 6 months. I was working there 6 days a week, flying home every Sunday, seeing Carolyn, who was basically my pretty much new wife. Actually, no, that's not true. We were married for about 5 years. And I realized that this was a crazy way to live. And Carolyn had been a real estate broker for about 7 years at that point. And I looked at her, I said, you know what? I'm 42 years old right now. In 20 years, I'm going to be in my 60s, and if I'm still slinging hash, one night while we're upstate and I'm asleep, I need you to go to Walmart, buy a baseball bat, come back home, and kill me. And that's the truth. And she looked at me without missing a beat, and she said, you've been buying and selling real estate, Paul, since you were in your 20s. You listen to every one of my deals, Paul, while I'm on the phone. Why don't you be my business partner? And I looked at her, and I was like, really? And I was like, I'm going to be a real estate broker. Man, this is going to be so incredibly easy. So I walked to my partners in the restaurant business the next day and said, guys, I'm leaving. And, you know, a lot of people have said to me, how did the transition go? How did it work out? And it's a very, very simple quote. It wasn't a transition. I used to serve food, now I serve real estate. Food goes bad, real estate goes bad. You never let anyone in your restaurant leave unhappy. You always turn them around. At least that's what we did. And it's the same thing in the real estate business. You never let a customer leave unhappy. And that's what it's all about. I've never worked harder in my life. I love what I do. I love working with my wife, and things are good. That's it. That's the story.